All right, what we're looking at here is trying to find the distance between 2 points, and we're going to use a right triangle in order to do that. We have 2 points and we're going to create a hypotenuse. What we're going to do is construct 2 vertical lines, or excuse me, 2 straight lines. One of them is going to run laterally until we get directly underneath of our point, and then we will run one vertically as well. So we've constructed a right triangle. And once we've constructed a right triangle, we can count our sides just by counting the vertical and lateral movement. For instance, this has moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units. So it's a side of 6. This one has risen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is also risen 6. This is actually what's known as an isosceles triangle, which we will later learn. But you have probably remembered Pythagorean's theorem. Whether you were taught a squared plus b squared equals c squared, leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared, you will hear me go to that one a lot. The reason why I like that one so much is because it doesn't matter which leg is which. A, B, it does not matter in this case. So what I'm going to do is replace any of the 2 legs. In this case, they're both equal, so we're going to go with 6 squared plus 6 squared equals the hypotenuse squared. And we know that 6 squared is 36, so it's going to be 36 on either try. And this will equal c squared. Now, this is going to equal 72 c squared. In order to get rid of a square, we've got to use the inverse of that, which is a square root. So we're looking for the square root of 72. Now, this one asks us to write this in the nearest tenths. So we don't have to do any reducing of decimals. So what we end up with is 8.49. So the distance of the line that we've constructed is 8.49. Let's take a look at another one. So what we used was Pythagorean's theorem, but what I'm going to give you, and you need to write this down, this is the distance formula. And you can construct a triangle if you want, but the distance formula is the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And that is Pythagorean's theorem. If you think about it, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. If we're looking for c, we would take the square root, and what we end up with is the square root of a squared plus b squared is what the distance is. In this case, it does not matter which one is x1 and which one is x2. Just make sure that you are consistent, unlike I am right there. x1, y1, x2, y2. So what I'm going to do is x2 minus x1. Make sure you're very conscious of your signs, squared. Use brackets, whatever you want to use. Plus y2 minus y1 squared. So what we end up with here is negative 7 plus 9, which is a positive 2. Equals negative 7 squared. Make sure you do use the parentheses, because if you don't use the parentheses, you're going to end up with some issues. So we end up with 49 plus 4 So we're going to find the square root of 53. We may learn how we can estimate these numbers, but we're going to just take this to our calculator and see what we get here. It's going to be a number between 7 and 8, because I know that 49 is the square root of 7. So this would end up being approximately, that is our approximation sign, 7.28. This does ask for the nearest tens place. I'm taking it to the 100ths place, so make sure if you're doing delta math, it should count that right, but that would bump that up to 7.3. Now for finding the midpoint. What the midpoint is the average of the 2 points. So if I'm looking for the midpoint, we can write this formula down. y2 plus x2 plus x1 divided by 2 is our ordered pair for the x midpoint, and y2 plus y1 divided by 2 will be our y coordinate. So it's just the average of the 2 points. A lot of times we can do that in our head, sometimes we cannot. So I'm going to find the average of -7 and -4. I do that by combining those two numbers and dividing by 2. So the midpoint would be -5.5. And then I need to find the ordered pair for my y value, which would be -5 plus 2 divided by 2. That would be -3 divided by 2. So my second ordered pair would be -1.5. And this is a location. The distance always needs to be positive because it's a distance. A midpoint is a location. So we can have negatives, and in this case, we actually have negatives in both cases. Now, if we've got it from a graph, really we don't need to graph to do this. We could just take our points and do it, but we are going to graph it. So we're at a point 6, -9, and -1, 1. I'm going to connect these 2 points very poorly. There we go. So I'm trying to find the midpoint of these two. Again, guys, with geometry, think about what you're doing. Recognize where this point is approximately going to be, but we can still use that formula. The average of the two numbers. Well, the average of 6 and -1 is to add those two numbers together and divide by 2. So we're looking at a point at 2.5. 2.5 makes sense. It's right around there. It looks like that's at -4. But don't trust these graphs to eyeball them. Let's take a mathematical approach to this. So we're going to go -9, plus 1, which is -8, divided by 2, which is -4, which it appeared to be. So we'll go from there. And then our example. This one's the toughest of what we do today. This is given the midpoint and one of the other points, what is the coordinate for B? So what it's saying is we've got a point at A, 8, 1. Put it in the right spot. 8, 1, over 8, up 1. We've got a midpoint, we'll do this in another color, at 2, -2, so it's down here. And then we've got a point in space that is B. I know it's in this direction because it told me that M was the midpoint, and we're just going to continue the pattern. And the midpoint is, in fact, at 2, -2. Now, there's all kinds of fancy formulas you can use to do these, but use your common sense. To go from 8 to 2 means that I backed up 6. That's my X value. So I'm going to back up an additional 6, which would put me at -4. And then I look at my Y value, which I know started at 1, and it went down, to -2. Well, that means it went down 3. So if it went down 3 to get to the middle, it's going to go down 3 to get to the next one. So if I go down 3 from -2, I am now at -5. So that's how I can calculate my value. A lot of times in geometry, guys, you can piece things together. You don't have to use formulas. Just use your common sense. And like we said, we backed up 6 and we went down 3.